This is Evangelist Henry Walker. Thank you for tuning into the podcast. Maybe you're listening on my website at henrywalker.org under audio messages, or maybe you're listening at podpoint.com/Henry Walker, or maybe you're listening on my YouTube channel, New Life Revival International Henry Walker. I want to start a new message today talking about going from the ordinary to the extraordinary as the Father uses us for His praise and honor and purpose. But let's go to the Father in prayer first. Father, I thank you for another opportunity to minister to your people, Father. I ask you to use me just the way you want, Father. Let me say only what you want me to say, nothing more and nothing less. Help people to open up their spirits, Father, and not only receive the word, but study the word for themselves. And Father, we give you all the praise and the honor, Father, in the mighty name of Yahshua, by the blood of Yahshua. Let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 1. Again, talking about going from the ordinary to the extraordinary, as we let the Father use us. And again, He gets all the praise and the honor, but we can go from ordinary being promoted to the extraordinary. And it's all about Him. It's all how He uses us and how we allow Him to use us, how we surrender everything to Him, especially our flesh, so He can come into our spirit and mortify the deeds of our flesh, making us more like Yahshua, bringing the fruit of the Spirit out of our lives. Love, joy, peace, longsuffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. And as we surrender everything to Him, there's no telling how He could use us. We could change whole cities, whole states, countries. But it's how much we yield to Him and His purpose for us. And again, it's all about Him. It's all about His anointing. But He's looking for people who just surrender and allow Him to use them whenever and wherever and to whomever. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 26. For you see your calling, brethren, how that not many wise men after the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble are called. But the Father had chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise. And the Father had chosen the weak things of the world to confound the things which are mighty. And base things of the world, and things which are despised, had the Father chosen. Yet, and things which are not, to bring to naught things that are, that no flesh should have praise in His presence. What He does to us, again, what we allow Him to do to us. Go with me to 1 Samuel. I want to talk about a lady named Abigail. 1 Samuel chapter 25. An ordinary person who went from the ordinary to the extraordinary. Later on, we want to talk about some of the steps to go from ordinary to extraordinary. But the most important step is to surrender everything to the Father, as I mentioned. And He puts us on that road of sanctification, and every day, as we allow Him to, He takes things out of our lives that should not be there. He gets us ready for the rapture, ready for heaven. 1 Samuel chapter 25. 1 Samuel is after Joshua judges Ruth. 1 Samuel. Again, talking about a woman named Abigail. So David and his men wanted some food, some water, something to help them, to refresh them. In verse 2, there was a man in Maon whose possessions were in Carmel, and the man was very great. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, and he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. And the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife Abigail, and she was a woman of good understanding and of a beautiful countenance, but the man was churlish and evil in his doings, and he was of the house of Caleb. So David sent some men to him to get some food, some supplies. In verse 10, and Nabal answered David's servants and said, Who is David, and who is the son of Jesse? There be many servants nowadays that break away every man from his master. Shall I then take bread and my water and my flesh that I have killed for my shearers, and give it unto men whom I know not whence they be? And so they went back and told David, and David was really upset. But Abigail, his wife, came and brought supplies to David and his men. Verse 28, I pray you forgive the trespass of your handmaid, for Yahweh will certainly make you a sure house, and because you fight at the battles of Yahweh, and evil had not been found in you all your days, yet a man is risen to pursue you and to seek your soul. But your soul shall be bound in the bundle of life with Yahweh, your Elohim, and the souls of thy enemies. Them shall he sling out as out of the middle of a sling. And he understood he used a slingshot and a stone to kill Goliath. So the father really used her to stop David from killing this man, shedding his blood. She said in verse 31, when Yahweh deals well with you, remember me, your handmaid. And he thanked her for his advice. The advice came from Yahweh. And he said, if you didn't come, I was ready to kill Nabal. And she went back and told Nabal, and Nabal just died when he heard what had happened, what David was going to do. In verse 40, when the servants of David would come to Abigail to Carmel, they spoke unto her, saying, David sent us unto you to take you to him to wife. And she bowed down and she went with David and became his wife. So look how she came from being ordinary to extraordinary, becoming David's wife. Look how she went from ordinary to extraordinary. Because she obeyed the father and delivered a message to David and stopped David from having blood on his hands with Nabal. See, vengeance is the father's, and he took care of Nabal. So you see how the father just raised her up tremendously. Let's go to the book of Acts. Go to right to the book of Acts. Just people coming out of nowhere and doing extraordinary things. Acts chapter 6. I want to talk somewhat about Stephen. Came out of nowhere. Acts chapter 6. The widows were being neglected in the daily ministering, and some had to serve tables. Help them. In verse 3, the apostles said in verse 3, wherefore, brethren, look ye out among you 7 men of honest report, full of the Spirit of the Father and wisdom, whom we may appoint over this business. And Stephen was one of them. In verse 6, whom they set before the apostles, and when they had prayed, they laid their hands on them. In verse 7, and the word of Elohim increased, and the number of the disciples multiplied in Jerusalem greatly, and a great company of priests were obedient to the faith. And Stephen, full of faith and power, did great wonders and miracles among the people. And some of the people in the synagogue were disputing with Stephen, and they brought him before the council. And with these people in the council, the father really used Stephen to go back in history and explain about Yahweh. In verse 51, chapter 7, Acts chapter 7, Stephen said to these people in the council, you stiff-necked and uncircumcised in heart and ears, you always do resist the Spirit of the Father. As your fathers did, so do you. Which of the prophets have not your fathers persecuted? And they have slain them, which showed before the coming of the just one, Yahshua, of whom you have been now the betrayers and murderers. In verse 53, who have received the law by the disposition of angels and have not kept it. In verse 54, when they heard these things, they were cut to the heart, and they gnashed on him with their teeth. That's how angry they were at Stephen. But it didn't matter. He just wanted to minister to them the way the Father wanted to use him. He's totally submitted to the Father. He's the first martyr of the early believers. In verse 55, but he, being full of the Spirit of the Father, looked up steadfastly into heaven and saw the Father and Yahshua standing on the right hand of the Father. And he said, behold, I see the heavens open, and the Son of Man standing on the right hand of Elohim, and the Son of Man standing on the right hand of the Father. Then he really got angry. Verse 57, then he cried out with a loud voice and stopped their ears and ran upon him with one accord, and cast him out of the city and stoned him. And the witnesses laid down their clothes at a young man's feet, whose name was Saul. And he stoned Stephen, calling upon the Father and saying, Yahshua, receive my spirit. Stephen called upon the Father and said, Yahshua, receive my spirit. Yahshua is the Father manifested in the flesh. I have a book on my website at henrywalker.org under the written messages, the very bottom. Is the Trinity really a mystery? It'll explain the so-called mystery of the Trinity. And he kneeled down and cried with a loud voice, Yahshua, let not this sin to their charge. And when he had said this, he fell asleep. Look at the impression he made upon Saul, who later became Paul. who wrote 2/3 of the New Testament. He went from ordinary to extraordinary. Go with me to Acts chapter 4. Go back to Acts chapter 4. I want to talk about some of the steps to go from ordinary to extraordinary with the Father in the way He uses us. That first step is total submission to Him. We talked about that. Surrendering everything to Him, especially our flesh. In Acts chapter 4, starting in verse 18, Peter and John were arrested. They're told not to teach or preach in the name of Yahshua anymore in verse 18. But Peter and John answered and said unto them, whether it be right in the sight of the Father to hearken unto you more than unto the Father, judge ye. For we cannot but speak the things which you have seen and heard. So they're showing the courage. That's the second step, is to show courage in how the Father is using you. Be afraid of nothing. Just to have that courage as the Father uses us and sends us where He sends us. Have that courage. So the number 2 step requirement is to have that courage, no matter how the Father uses us, no matter where He uses us, no matter who He uses us to help. In verse 29, they went to Yahshua after they were threatened. And now Yahshua, behold their threatenings, and grant to thy servants that with all boldness they may speak thy word, by stretching forth thy hand to heal, and that signs and wonders may be done in the name of Yahshua. And when they had prayed, the place was shaken, where they were assembled together, and they were all filled with the Spirit of the Father, and they spoke the word of the Father with boldness. So they had that courage. They wanted more. They were willing to do more. And that's the number 3 aspect, requirement, is to be willing to do whatever He wants you to do. In chapter 5, verse 12, they got what they asked for. They had courage. They wanted to be used more. And they were willing to do anything that the Father wanted them to do. In verse 12, and by the hands of the apostles were many signs and wonders wrought among the people, and they were all with one accord in Solomon's porch. And the rest does no man join himself to them, but the people magnified them. And believers were the more added to Yahshua, multitudes both of men and women, insomuch that they brought forth the sick into the streets and laid them on beds and couches, that at least the least of the miracles, the shadow of Peter passing by, might overshadow some of them. And there came also a multitude out of the cities round about Jerusalem, bringing sick folks, and them which were vexed with unclean spirits, and they were healed every one. Look at the boldness, the courage, the willingness to do anything that the Father wanted them to do. In Acts 16, in verse 9, and a vision appeared to Paul in the night. There stood a man of Macedonia and prayed him, saying, come over into Macedonia and help us. And after he had seen the vision, immediately he endeavored to go into Macedonia, assuredly gathering that Yahshua had called us for to preach the gospel unto them. And he went there immediately. They had that willingness, they had that courage, that willingness to do whatever Yahshua wanted them to do. And we too need that willingness. If He says, jump, say, Father, how high? How high do you want me to jump? Whatever He asks us to do, do it. In Acts 17, number 4 is they were teachable. In verse 10, Acts 17, verse 10, and the brethren immediately sent away Paul and Silas by night unto Berea, who coming thither went into the synagogue of the Jews. These were more noble than those in Thessalonica, in that they received the word with all readiness of mind, and searched the scriptures daily, whether those things were so. Therefore many of them believed, also of honorable women which were Greeks, and of men not a few. So they were teachable. We always need to be teachable. The Father wants to show us different things every day. Listen to Him. Let's go to Acts chapter 9. Here's Yahshua talking to Ananias. He wanted Ananias to lay hands on Saul, who later became Paul, because he was blinded physically and spiritually. In Acts chapter 9, verse 15, but Yahshua said unto him, to Ananias, go thy way, for he is a chosen vessel unto me. Talking about Saul. or Paul, to bear my name before the Gentiles and kings and the children of Israel. For I'll show him how great things he must suffer for my name's sake. This is Saul's purpose in Acts chapter 20. In verse 22, Paul saying, And now behold, I go bound in the Spirit unto Jerusalem, not knowing the things that shall befall me there, save that the Spirit of the Father witnessed in every city, saying that bonds and afflictions abide me, but none of these things move me. See, he had that deep sense of purpose. Nothing could interfere with his course that the Father had given him through Yahshua. But none of these things move me, neither count I my life dear unto myself, so that I might finish my course with joy and the ministry which I have received of Yahshua, to testify the gospel of the grace of the Father. So he had a deep sense of purpose. So again, those steps are surrendering everything to the Father, especially our flesh. Number 2 is having that courage to do whatever he asks us to do. Number 3 is having that willingness to increase in power and knowledge and to go wherever he wants us to go. They prayed for more signs and wonders to be done. They're willing to be used by the Father and him using them in signs and wonders. That willingness to expand, to do whatever he wanted them to do, to get that word out to many, many people. They would take risk, whatever is necessary, the willingness to get the word out. And number 4, we talked about they were teachable. We need to be teachable. The believers at Berea searched the scriptures daily. They wanted to hear from the Father daily. And number 5, they had a deep sense of purpose, talking about Saul, who became Paul. Said, none of these things move me. I just want to finish my course. Which is so very important. How they came from ordinary to extraordinary. Go with me to Joshua chapter 2. We want to talk about Rahab. Joshua had sent out 2 spies to go into Jericho, to spy out Jericho. And they came and went to a harlot's house named Rahab. And they stayed there. She brought them, the 2 men, up to the roof of the house and hid them with the stalks of flax which she had laid in order upon them. She said in verse 9 to the spies, I know that Yahweh had given you the land, and that your terror is fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land faint because of you. For we heard how Yahweh dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what he did unto the 2 kings of the Amorites that were on the other side of Jordan, Sinai and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. Verse 11, as soon as we had heard these things, our hearts did melt, neither did remain any more courage in any man because of you. For Yahweh, your Elohim, he is Elohim in heaven above and in earth beneath. She's about ready to become a believer. Now therefore I pray you, swear unto me in verse 12, since I have showed you kindness, that you will also show kindness unto my father's house, and give me a true token. They escaped by using a red cord from her window, and they told her, hang this red cord from your window, and you will be protected. And that's exactly what happened. And Rahab became a believer in Yahweh. Yahshua is descended from Rahab, a prostitute. It's no accident. Yahweh wanted it that way. So look how she came from ordinary to extraordinary by helping those 2 spies. The Father was talking to her about everything that he had done for his people, and she was going in that direction towards Yahweh. So you see how we can go from ordinary to extraordinary by doing what the Father wants us to do on a daily basis. But the choice is up to you. It's up to all of us. The Father is ready to use us as we surrender to him. But it's up to us to whether we want to be extraordinarily used by him. If it means winning more souls to him, I'm all for it. Because the rapture is soon approaching, in my opinion, and it's time for us to help people to get through that door of the rapture before it closes. Before we get back to the message, I want to remind you that this is a pro-life ministry. We believe that life begins at conception, that the Father is the agent of conception, and every podcast, I want to pray for the babies in the womb. And before I do, I want to remind you and inform you, if you don't know, the baby in the womb, around 18 days, the baby's heart begins to beat, and around 4 months, the baby's heart is pumping about 25 quarts of blood per day. This is a baby. This is a life, not a tissue. And most scientists believe that life begins at conception. The College of Pediatrics believes that life begins at conception. So we want to pray for the babies in the womb. Father, I ask you to touch the babies in the womb, bring them to a full birth, Father. And we give you all the praise and the honor, Father, in the mighty name of Yahshua, by the blood of Yahshua. And if any of you out there had an abortion, repent, ask the Father to forgive you, and go on and follow him into purpose and destiny. So back to the message. We're talking about how we can go from ordinary to extraordinary, and the Father using us for his praise and his honor, and reaching more and more souls for him. We think about David washing his sheep, how Goliath and the Philistines were standing before the Israelites, and Goliath was speaking great words against Yahweh. But David was not impressed at all of Goliath, because he knew that the battle wasn't his. He was speaking about his Yahweh, and Yahweh was going to bring Goliath down, and he's going to use him. But he went from a shepherd boy to the king, from ordinary to extraordinary. He had the desire. He loved Yahweh. He wrote so many songs, so many psalms. He just loved Yahweh so much. Even after he made that mistake with Bathsheba, read Psalm 51. He was so humble and so repentant. And the Father used him to help so many people, to be the king, to sit on that throne, from a shepherd's boy washing the sheep to washing the sheep of Israel as the king. So again, allow the Father to use you. Let him bring you from ordinary to extraordinary. Only he can do it, but just be available. Make yourself available. The Father will create the openings and just walk into those openings. Allow him to use you. In talking about the Father creating openings and us walking into openings, turn with me to Genesis chapter 41, talking about Joseph. Joseph had interpreted 2 dreams, one for the chief butler for Pharaoh and one for the chief baker for Pharaoh. And the chief butler was promoted back to the Pharaoh in his position. And Pharaoh had a dream. Nobody could interpret it. And they called for Joseph based on what the chief butler said. Genesis 41, verse 14. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon, and he shaved himself and changed his clothing and came unto Pharaoh. And he interpreted the dream for Pharaoh, where there would be 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine, and need to store up the food. In verse 38, and Pharaoh said unto his servants, Can we find such a one as this, a man in whom the spirit of Elohim is? In verse 40, Pharaoh said to him, You shall be over my house, and according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand and put it upon Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck. And he made him to ride in the second chariot which he had. And they cried before him, bowed a knee, and he made him rule over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without you shall no man lift up his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. So look how the Father raised them up from the ordinary to the extraordinary, to be used by the Father, and to save all of Egypt and Israel from the 7 years of famine. So we can see how the Father can create openings for us where he can use us in extraordinary ways, and he gets all the praise and the honor. Allow him to do so today and help people to get ready for the rapture. This is something I mention on every podcast. Also, if your flesh is giving you impure thoughts, worried thoughts, fearful, anxious thoughts, just say out loud, Yahshua, I thank you for that crown of thorns that you had on your head. That was for me. That means my mind is protected by your blood. I only think your thoughts. And give those thoughts to the Father. Also, as part of our ministry, every week we feed the poor in Nassau, the Bahamas. If the Father prompts you to help in this part of our ministry, every gift is tax deductible. We're a 501c3 organization, New Life Revival International Incorporated. And you can donate by going to my website at henrywalker.org and click on the donate button, or you can go to podpoint.com/Henry Walker and click on the donate button. Supplying the food to them on a weekly basis really meets them at the point of their need. I just hate to see people sleeping on the beach, sleeping in cars, no food, no water. Sometimes it's whole families. But this ministry meets them at the point of their need as far as food and water. And before I close, don't forget about the Sabbath from Friday 6 p.m. to Saturday 6 p.m. It's a wonderful time of coming into the Father's presence as He draws us. It's a beautiful preview of heaven. Hebrews 4 says to labor into that rest. Having a view of heaven by entering into that rest on the Sabbath helps us to fight off temptation, knowing that this is a preview of heaven, and heaven is so wonderful, it's eternal with the Father. So it's a beautiful rest with the Father at the end of the week, and He gives us more power at the beginning of the week, which starts at Saturday at 6 p.m. Remember, the day runs from 6 p.m. to 6 p.m. 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. are the 12 hours of the day, which Yahshua talked about. 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. are the 12 hours of the night, the night seasons. And this is all brought out in my book called Noon, at the bottom of my written message page at henrywalker.org. Along with my book is The Trinity Really a Mystery. They're both free. I'm sure you enjoy both of them. And if any of you have any praise reports or any questions, you can email me at contact@henrywalker.org, contact@henrywalker.org. I'll be so glad to hear from you. And if you enjoy these podcasts, tell other people about these podcasts, share, subscribe, hit the like button, and remember, till next time, this is Evangelist Henry Walker saying, greater is the Father in you, your daddy, the King of the universe, than anything or anybody in the world.